I worked backstage at the Grammys, and what Taylor Swift became before walking on stage still haunts me. You've seen the confident, flawless superstar everyone adores, but that's not who I saw behind the curtains. What I witnessed that night was something darker, something unnatural. The truth about her success. It wasn't just fame, it came at a price. And what I discovered backstage would change how you'll ever see her again. My first time working backstage at the Grammys was a dream come true. I had always admired the stars, the glitz, the glamour, but I never imagined the horrors I'd uncover. Taylor Swift, the shining jewel of pop music, was exactly what I'd imagined. Effortless, confident, poised. She moved through the backstage area like she belonged to another world, one that didn't care about time or reality. The buzz around her was electric, like something bigger was in the air, unspoken but palpable. But as I watched her, something didn't sit right. While I did my job, setting up equipment and running errands, I couldn't shake the feeling that something about her was different. The way people moved around her, the way the crowd parted when she walked. There was an unnatural quality to it all. It felt like she was in control of more than just the spotlight. Then came the whispers. There were rumors about a ritual before every show, but no one dared to elaborate. The crew murmured about it, but I paid it no mind until I started noticing patterns. Taylor would disappear into a private room with her team and a security guard. And then there would be an unmistakable silence. It wasn't normal silence. It felt heavy, suffocating. Curiosity gnawed at me. I had to know what was happening behind that door. One evening, I followed her team, slipping in unnoticed as the door closed behind them. What I saw next is burned into my memory. Taylor sat cross-legged in the middle of the room, eyes closed, her face pale, her breath shallow. The room was cold, darker than it should have been, lit only by flickering candles casting eerie shadows. Her team stood around her in a perfect circle, their eyes nervously darting toward the shadows. Strange symbols were etched into the walls, and at the center of it all, a small ornate box rested before Taylor. Her trembling hands hovered over it like she was summoning something. Then her eyes snapped open. They weren't the same eyes I'd seen before. They were darker, deeper, hollow. In that moment, I knew I wasn't witnessing a typical ritual. It was something far more terrifying. Her smile, once warm, was now empty, belonging to someone who had seen things no one should ever see. The room fell silent again, and her team gathered the symbols, sealing the ritual. Taylor stood, moving unnaturally, as if puppeteered by invisible strings. Her eyes returned to normal, but there was something off about her, something dark, something that wasn't entirely her anymore. The door opened, and one of the crew nodded at me, as if nothing had happened. But I was left shaken, unable to comprehend what I'd just seen. And the worst part? This was just the beginning. I had scratched the surface of something far deeper and far darker than I could have ever imagined. The next few days at the Grammys passed in a blur of rehearsals and sound checks, but I couldn't shake the haunting image of what I had witnessed behind that door. The strange symbols, the ritual, the empty smile. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Taylor's hollow gaze, and I knew something dark was happening backstage. I couldn't let it go. I had to learn more. I tried asking around, but no one would speak. Taylor's team was impenetrable, and the crew offered only nervous smiles when I brought it up. It was clear. There was a thick tension backstage, something they were too afraid to talk about. But I wasn't the only one who had seen the darkness. I overheard 2 crew members one night laughing, but the words sent a chill down my spine. The ritual's not just for the performance. That was all I needed to hear. The ritual wasn't a one-time thing. It was a part of something much bigger. Without it, Taylor wouldn't be able to perform. She wouldn't be the Taylor we all saw on stage. She wouldn't be her. The crew members quickly changed the subject when they saw me. But I wasn't fooled. They knew. They all knew. There was something far darker going on, and they were terrified to speak of it. Determined to get answers, I decided to follow Taylor's team again, this time with more intention. I had to see the ritual with my own eyes. On the night of the show, I found an excuse to slip away from the crew during final preparations. The backstage area buzzed with excitement, but I knew where I was headed. I had learned the path to her private room. I waited for the bodyguards to look away, then silently slipped inside. The room was darker than I expected, shadows dancing across the walls. The air smelled strange, thick with a pungent sweetness. Taylor sat in the center of the room, eyes closed, deep in concentration. Her team surrounded her in a circle, but this time there was something new. A larger object in front of her, intricately carved and glowing faintly. It wasn't just a ritual anymore. It was a sacrifice. An assistant carefully arranged stones, symbols, and a glowing liquid on a cloth, and the sigils on the walls seemed to pulse. The room vibrated with a strange energy. Taylor's eyes snapped open, but they weren't the same. They were wide, glassy, empty. Her voice, when she spoke, wasn't her own. It was deep, distorted, sending shivers down my spine. The room shook as she muttered incomprehensible words, a language I didn't understand. The glowing liquid bubbled and glowed brighter with each word she spoke. The room grew colder, and I felt as if I was standing on the edge of something far darker than I could ever imagine. Then it hit me. This wasn't just about fame. This wasn't just about her career. The rituals, the sacrifices, they were to keep her alive in the spotlight. Taylor had been paying the price for her fame for as long as she could remember. Without this ritual, she would fade, just like every other star. Her success, her money, her fame, they all came at a price. As I stood there, watching her perform the final part of the ritual, I realized I wasn't just witnessing a performance. It was a possession. The door creaked open and I knew I had to leave. But I wasn't the same. What I had just witnessed couldn't be ignored. Taylor Swift wasn't just a pop star. She was something far darker, something tied to something ancient and sinister. I thought I had seen everything, but this was only the beginning. The deeper I dug, the more I realized the rituals weren't just for show. They were vital to her success. But the question lingered. Why? Why was she sacrificing so much for fame? What was the cost? And what would it take for her to stop? The next few weeks at the Grammys were filled with strange tension. Each night, I could feel the unspoken weight that lingered in the air before every performance. Every step Taylor took on that stage seemed to cost her more than just energy or focus. It felt like she was giving up something deeper, something darker, her very soul, perhaps. But it wasn't just the backstage atmosphere that had changed. I had changed too. I couldn't look at her the same way again. couldn't ignore the dark forces that seemed to be controlling her every move. It was on the night of the next major performance that I made my biggest mistake. I had learned the routine. I knew when Taylor would disappear into her private room for her pre-performance ritual. This time, I was determined to find out what happened in the final moments. I had to see the full extent of this transformation, this sacrifice, with my own eyes. I couldn't let myself be left in the dark anymore. I waited for the usual signs. The crew bustling around, the murmurs that Taylor was about to go into the final stages of preparation. The familiar faces of her team began moving in, preparing the room for her. I slipped into position, unnoticed, and followed them quietly down the hallway. I knew exactly where they were going. Taylor's private room, the sacred space, was just ahead. The door closed behind them, and the silence settled in. This time, though, I didn't try to sneak in the way I had before. This time, I was determined. I'd waited long enough. There was too much at stake. If I didn't find out what was happening now, I feared I'd never have the chance again. The door was slightly ajar, just enough for me to slip inside unnoticed. The room was dark, far darker than it should have been, and the strange smell of incense and something sweet mixed with the air, making it hard to breathe. I stepped closer to the shadows, my heart pounding so loudly I feared it would give me away. I had to stay calm. I had to stay focused. But the longer I stood there, the more uneasy I felt. This wasn't just a ritual. This was something else. Something that was tying me to Taylor and her dark world. As I inched forward, I saw the familiar symbols again, drawn across the walls in what seemed like blood. The same symbols I had seen on the first night. But this time, the room was different. Louder, almost suffocating. Taylor wasn't alone. There were several members of her team, each of them looking increasingly tense, their eyes darting around as if they were expecting something, waiting for something. I realized I wasn't the only one on edge. They had become used to it. They had become part of it, part of the ritual, just like Taylor had. She was standing in the center of the room, her body unmoving, just like before. But now, her hands were shaking, a sign that the transformation was starting again. Her eyes were closed, but I could tell she was no longer there. It wasn't Taylor anymore. Something darker had taken over. Something ancient. I felt a chill wash over me, and for a moment, I thought I might collapse. But I couldn't look away. I had come this far, and now I was witnessing something that no one else could ever know. Taylor wasn't just performing. She was channeling something. Someone else. An entity, maybe. A force that had claim over her. The room grew colder, the candles flickering wildly. I watched, heart in my throat, as her team began to prepare the final pieces. A silver bowl was placed in front of her, filled with what looked like a strange, glowing liquid. The assistant who had been closest to her approached her, holding an ornate knife. It gleamed under the dim light, catching my attention as if it had been waiting for its moment. I wanted to scream. I wanted to run, but my feet wouldn't move. My body was frozen in terror. Taylor lifted her hand, and the room seemed to grow even colder. Her voice, when it came, was not her own. It was low, guttural, a foreign language I couldn't understand. It wasn't just a ritual, it was a summoning. She was calling something that required a price, and as the assistant stepped forward with the knife, I realized what that price was. Without hesitation, Taylor cut her palm, her blood dripping into the glowing liquid in the silver bowl. The air thickened, the room vibrating as though the walls themselves were breathing. The entire ritual seemed to come alive, like it had been waiting for her to complete it. The room filled with a low hum, a sound that shook me to my core. I wanted to run, but I was entranced by it, unable to move. It was too late. I was part of this now. Whether I liked it or not, I had seen the sacrifice Taylor was making and what it was costing her. The light in the room seemed to flicker, and for just a moment I saw something in the shadows. It wasn't human. It was something darker, something that was feeding off the power of the ritual, something ancient. It smiled, and I knew in that moment I would never forget what I had witnessed. The assistant quickly stepped back, sealing the ritual. Taylor's body shuddered, and for the briefest moment I saw her return. She blinked as if waking from a dream, but her eyes, those eyes, they were no longer hers. She had been changed. And then the door opened. I had to leave. I didn't want to, but I had to. I didn't want to be a part of this anymore. But now, there was no escaping it. I knew too much. The worst part was, it had only just begun. I thought I had seen the worst. But what happened after the ritual would change everything I thought I knew about Taylor Swift and the price she was paying for her fame. The more I tried to convince myself that what I'd witnessed wasn't real, the clearer it became that I couldn't unsee it. That moment, Taylor standing there, the ritual, the whispers, the blood, it had all imprinted itself on my mind. There was no way to ignore it. It was too late. I had seen too much. And now, I was tangled in something much darker than just backstage gossip or superstition. I was part of it now. I thought about it constantly. What I had witnessed, and, more importantly, the price Taylor had paid for her fame. Fame wasn't just about talent and hard work like the world believed. It wasn't about the catchy songs, the perfect performances, the sold-out shows. It was something far more sinister, something no one could understand unless they'd seen it for themselves. The blood, the symbols, the dark force controlling her. It wasn't a choice. It was a curse. The whispers backstage were getting harder to ignore. More and more people, from the crew to the staff, spoke in hushed tones, like they were part of a secret society. They'd go about their duties, but there was always this strange tension, like everyone knew something they weren't supposed to know. And the more I watched, the more I realized it wasn't just Taylor. There was something about the entire entourage, the team, the handlers, the assistants, that made them feel different. They weren't just her employees. They were protectors. Protectors of something dark. Something no one dared talk about. I overheard a conversation between two of the security team members. They were standing by the side of the stage, talking in low voices. It wasn't until I was close enough to overhear the words that I realized the terrifying truth. "She's not just a pop star," one of them said, almost casually, like it was no big deal. "She's a vessel. We all know what's at stake. If she stops, if the ritual stops, the consequences will be catastrophic." The word vessel struck me like a thunderclap. I didn't want to believe it, but I couldn't ignore what I'd seen. Taylor wasn't just performing for the crowd. She was feeding something far more powerful than any of us could comprehend. Her success, her fame, came at a price, and that price wasn't just a sacrifice in some metaphorical sense. It was a sacrifice in the truest sense of the word. I couldn't shake the thought. Every time she walked on stage, every time she smiled and sang, she was offering herself up to something darker. It wasn't just the public's adoration she was after. It was something far more personal, something mysterious and, dare I say it, demonic. As the days passed, I couldn't focus on anything else. I tried to bury myself in the work, trying to ignore the sick feeling gnawing at me, but it was always there, hanging over me like a dark cloud. And as Taylor's performances grew closer, as she prepared for the biggest show of her career, I began to understand the true nature of what was happening. The night before the biggest Grammy performance, the atmosphere was thick with dread. It wasn't like before, when everyone was excited and on edge with anticipation. This time, it was different. There was a sense of urgency, something that had never been there before. The crew was moving faster, working harder, preparing everything with a level of precision that was unsettling. And through it all, Taylor remained in her private room, surrounded by her team, preparing for the ritual that would ensure her success. I had to know. I couldn't let it go. I couldn't be part of this lie any longer. I waited for the usual signs, the buzz in the air, the nervous tension. The crew began to shuffle, the security team posted up by the door to Taylor's private room. But tonight, I wasn't waiting. I wasn't going to sneak. This time, I was going to be bold. I had to know what the price really was. I moved quickly, avoiding the gaze of anyone who might be watching. I slipped through the shadows, my heart pounding as I neared the room. The door was closed, just as it had always been. But tonight, I wasn't going to stand outside. Tonight, I was going in. I pushed the door open just enough to slip through, and the room was exactly as I had seen it before. Shadows stretching across the walls, the faint smell of incense still lingering in the air. But this time, the energy in the room was different. It was darker, heavier. As soon as I stepped inside, I felt it. The weight of something ancient, something powerful, and something I couldn't explain. Taylor was sitting in the middle of the room, her eyes closed, her body completely still. But there was a difference this time. There was an unease in the air, something that made my skin crawl. Her team stood around her, but they weren't just preparing for another performance. They were preparing for something much more dangerous. They were preparing for the final act. The assistant placed the silver bowl in front of Taylor once again, just as they had before. But this time, the liquid inside the bowl was different. It wasn't glowing anymore. It was dark, blood red, and thick like tar. As the assistant dipped the ornate knife into the bowl, I could feel the room pulse with energy, like the air was charged with electricity. This wasn't a ritual anymore. This was a sacrifice. And then, it hit me. This was the price. The price of fame wasn't just about doing things behind closed doors. It was about losing yourself, losing the very essence of who you were, to keep the world at your feet. Taylor had traded her soul for this life, and every time she performed, every time she took the stage, she gave up more and more of herself. Her humanity was slipping away with each song, each performance, and the world had no idea. They didn't see the price she was paying. As the assistant placed the knife in her hand, Taylor's fingers trembled, but she didn't hesitate. She cut deep into her palm, her blood dripping into the bowl. It wasn't just a cut. It was an offering. The air thickened. The shadows grew deeper and the room seemed to spin. The very walls were closing in around me. I knew I was witnessing something that no one should ever see. The bowl was passed around to the team, and they each dipped their fingers into the blood, murmuring incantations under their breath. The chanting grew louder, more intense, as Taylor's body shuddered violently. She wasn't just performing, she was being possessed. The world saw a star, a goddess, someone who had it all. But backstage, she was becoming something else, something horrifying. But the worst part wasn't what I saw next. What I didn't know was that this ritual was far from over. There was a deeper darkness at play here, and it would change everything I thought I knew about Taylor, and about the price she was willing to pay to stay on top. The performance was just hours away, but the weight of what I had seen wouldn't let me go. The buzz of excitement around me felt like a cruel joke. The truth I had witnessed back there, behind the scenes, was haunting me. And I knew it was only a matter of time before it consumed me entirely. It wasn't just the blood or the whispered chants. It was the transformation I had seen before my eyes. The slow, eerie disappearance of the Taylor Swift I once thought I knew. In her place was something darker, something distant. Every time I looked at her, I saw the vacant, soulless stare of someone who was no longer fully present. There was something final about it, a sense that this performance would push her to the edge. What was happening behind closed doors was not just for show. It was a slow, inevitable descent into something darker. I stood frozen, too terrified to move, as her team hovered around her like mindless drones. They were all part of this twisted ritual. No one was exempt from its grasp, and tonight, I felt the full force of what they were doing. Then, as if fate had granted me a glimpse into the darkest corners of her world, the door to her room cracked open. My heart raced. This was my chance. I had to know the truth. Despite the fear, the terror that gripped me, I had to witness it all. The final part of her transformation. I stepped forward, slipping quietly through the crack in the door. Inside, the crew stood motionless, their eyes fixed on Taylor, who was at the center of the room. She stood there like a statue, unmoving, vacant. The energy in the room was like nothing I had ever felt before. Cold, charged. There was no sign of the Taylor Swift everyone adored. She wasn't there. This wasn't her. Her body twitched and jerked in unnatural ways, as if being pulled by strings that no one could see. The chanting from her team grew louder, more guttural. Their voices were not human anymore. They were like something out of a nightmare, chanting in a language I couldn't understand. Their faces void of any real emotion. And in the middle of it all, Taylor was merely the vessel. She wasn't in control. Whatever was in her, whatever had taken over her body, was the one pulling the strings now. Her face went slack, her eyes vacant, and the voice that came from her mouth wasn't hers. It was a deep, guttural sound that chilled me to my core. It was the voice of something ancient, something evil, and it was in complete control. Then it stopped. The chanting ceased. The room fell silent. Taylor blinked. Her gaze snapped back to life, but it was empty, hollow. She wasn't herself, not anymore. And the worst part? No one else seemed to notice. Her team quickly swarmed around her, shielding her from whatever dark force still lingered in the air. but she was gone. I backed away slowly, my heart pounding in my chest. What I had seen was too much. I had to escape. But as I stepped back through the door, I knew something more terrifying was unfolding. This ritual wasn't just about Taylor. It was spreading. And what came next would make me question everything I thought I knew about her team, and about the true price of fame. The darkness was coming for more than just her. The night of the performance was different. There was an overwhelming sense of finality in the air. The usual buzz of excitement backstage had morphed into something far darker. People moved quicker, more urgently, as if the show wasn't just another night for Taylor. It was the culmination of something much larger. The ritual had reached its peak, and the sense of dread that filled the space was unmistakable. I had spent hours wrestling with myself, trying to push away the terrifying truth I had learned. But the truth had claimed me, sinking its claws deep into my mind. Taylor Swift wasn't just a pop star. She wasn't just a talented musician or performer. She was a vessel, a puppet for something much older, much more powerful. A being tied to forces that no one, not even her, could control. I couldn't get the image of her out of my head. The way her eyes had glazed over, the emptiness in her gaze. Her transformation had been something out of a nightmare. But it was real, terrifyingly real. I could see it in her every time she stepped on a stage now. There was always a part of her missing, a piece of herself that was being consumed with every performance. Tonight was supposed to be the biggest night of her career. She was about to perform in front of millions, to claim her place as the queen of pop once again. But in the pit of my stomach, I knew this performance was different. This night wasn't just another Grammy. It was a turning point. Whatever forces were pulling Taylor's strings were getting stronger, and I couldn't help but feel that something terrible was going to happen. As I prepared for my role behind the scenes, I couldn't help but watch her from afar. She was being prepped by her team, but this time the atmosphere was colder, more tense. The rituals had escalated. The usual calm before the storm was replaced by a feeling of desperation. The people around her seemed nervous, like they were bracing themselves for what was coming. And for the first time, I saw the fear in their eyes. Taylor stood backstage, eyes closed, her face blank as her team surrounded her. Her manager, the ever-present calm figure, spoke to her in a voice I'd never heard before. Low and urgent, almost as if he was pleading with her. I couldn't hear the words, but I could see the way her body tensed, the way her hands trembled slightly as she stood still, caught in the middle of the preparations. The ritual wasn't just about getting her ready to perform. It was about preparing her soul, ensuring that she could walk on to that stage and deliver the performance that would keep her at the top. And that's when I saw it. One of the assistants approached her with another bowl, similar to the one I had seen before. But this time, it wasn't blood red. It was black, like the color of ink, and the liquid inside swirled with a life of its own. The assistant moved slowly, reverently, placing the bowl at her feet, as if offering it to her. I froze. The air in the room thickened as she bent down, her fingers hovering above the liquid. It wasn't just a sacrifice. It was an offering to whatever force was watching, waiting for her to comply. There was no hesitation this time. She dipped her fingers into the dark liquid, lifting them to her lips. As she did, the entire room seemed to hold its breath. Her eyes snapped open, and they weren't hers anymore. They were empty, cold, lifeless. They had become windows to something else. I watched as she brought her fingers to her lips, tasting the darkness. The room went silent as the ritual reached its peak. No one spoke, no one moved. The crew was no longer preparing her for the stage. They were preparing her for something much darker. I had thought the ritual was over before, but this was something else. This was something terrifying. And then she spoke. The words that came from her mouth weren't in any language I recognized. They were low, guttural, a strange mix of syllables that sounded like they were being forced out of her. The sound made my skin crawl, sending a shiver through my entire body. She wasn't just performing, she was summoning. The team around her began chanting along with her, their voices blending into a low, rhythmic hum that seemed to shake the very walls. The lights dimmed, the air grew colder, and the shadows in the room stretched longer, as if they were alive. The energy in the room was unlike anything I'd ever felt. It felt like something was breathing, something ancient, something that had been waiting for her to offer herself up once again. But what was even more terrifying was that she didn't seem to be in control. This was no longer Taylor's performance. It was an entity, something demonic controlling her body, her voice, her every movement. I wanted to run. I wanted to scream, to tell someone what was happening. But I knew I couldn't. The door was already closed, and I was trapped in the dark with the very thing I had feared. The energy in the room reached a fever pitch. I could feel it pulsing, vibrating, almost alive. Taylor's body jerked suddenly, as if something had seized her, pulling her to her feet. Her body seemed to move against her will, twisting, contorting in ways that felt unnatural, like a marionette pulled by invisible strings. And then, as suddenly as it had started, it stopped. The chanting ceased. The room fell silent. Taylor stood motionless, her body shuddering as if waking from a dream. Her eyes slowly returned to normal, but something in them had changed. They were no longer as empty, but the coldness still lingered. The transformation had been completed, and it was now her turn to take the stage. The crew moved swiftly, preparing her for the final performance. I was left there, paralyzed by what I had just witnessed. I couldn't process it. My mind was reeling, trying to comprehend what had just happened. Was this real? Was I really watching a pop star being possessed by something far darker? Or had I simply gone mad? I had to leave. I had to get out of there before I lost my mind completely. But as I turned and moved toward the door, I heard something. A whisper. So faint I could barely make it out. It came from the shadows, and it wasn't Taylor's voice. It was something else. Something that felt ancient and terrifying. You can never leave. The words sent a cold shiver down my spine, and for the first time since this all began, I was sure of one thing. I was in deeper than I could ever have imagined. There was no turning back now. As I walked out, the fear settled in, knowing that Taylor's performance was just the beginning. Whatever had taken her, had claimed her, was still lurking in the shadows, and it wouldn't stop. Not now, not ever. I thought I could escape. I thought I could push the memories out of my mind, but the truth I had uncovered was like a shadow that followed me, never leaving. I couldn't unsee what I had witnessed. The darkness behind Taylor's fame, the rituals, the blood. It was too much to ignore. The truth was out there, lurking in the corners of my mind, waiting to consume me. And now, it was taking over my every waking moment. The nightmares didn't stop. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw her, Taylor Swift. Her eyes empty, her body jerking uncontrollably as if it was no longer hers. The darkness had taken root, and it was feeding on her soul with every performance. I had tried to convince myself that it was just a bad dream, just the result of too much stress, too much time spent in the twisted world I had become part of. But deep down, I knew the truth. Taylor was no longer the person she once was. And the worst part was, I was trapped in it too. I had seen the ritual. I had seen the transformation. I had seen the dark force that controlled her. And now, I couldn't shake the feeling that it was watching me too. I was part of something I couldn't escape, no matter how hard I tried. Every day felt heavier. The fear I had carried in my chest since that first night never went away. It clung to me like a second skin. I couldn't look at Taylor the same way anymore. I couldn't hear her songs without hearing the whispers in the back of my mind. It wasn't her music that made her famous. It was something darker, something I couldn't understand but was inevitably tied to her existence. The more I worked backstage, the more I realized the extent of the control over her. Her team wasn't just there to guide her career. They were custodians, protecting her from the very thing she had become. One evening, after another performance, I found myself in the dark backstage corridors, wandering aimlessly. I was no longer sure of who I was. I had lost myself in this twisted world, and now I could feel it. The thing inside me. It had begun to feed on me too. Not physically, but mentally. I was no longer sure where the boundaries between reality and the ritual started or ended. I was becoming just like everyone else, a pawn in the game. I spent nights digging, searching for answers. Anything that could shed light on what was happening. I started talking to the people who had been with Taylor the longest, the ones who had worked for her before the ritual began. At first, they were reluctant to speak, but over time, I was able to piece together bits of information, fragments of a story too horrible to believe. They told me about her rise to fame, about the deal she had made, about the first time she had performed the ritual. And with each story, each detail, the truth became clearer. Taylor had sold herself. Not in the way people joked about when they talked about fame, but in a literal sense. She had offered up her soul to something far beyond her understanding. And now, she was bound to it. Forever. The ritual wasn't just about her success. It was about her very existence. Without it, she would cease to be. And there was no escape. As I pieced together the details, I realized something far worse. The force wasn't just satisfied with Taylor. It wanted more. It needed more. And it was only a matter of time before it came for me, too. I thought I could escape. I thought that by staying in the shadows, by keeping my distance, I could avoid the terrifying truth. But the truth was never something you could escape. It had already claimed me the moment I stepped backstage and saw what was happening to Taylor Swift. The ritual, the darkness, the sacrifice. It wasn't just hers. It was ours now. I was part of this twisted web, and there was no breaking free. I had watched Taylor become something else, something unrecognizable, a vessel for a force more ancient and terrifying than I could ever understand. Every performance, every Grammy, every step she took on that stage, it was all part of the deal she had made, a deal that had stripped her of her humanity, piece by piece. But what I didn't realize until it was too late was that this wasn't just about her anymore. The dark force, the entity that had claimed her, wasn't satisfied with only her soul. It had spread. It had started to consume everyone around her. Her team, the crew, the ones who had worked for her for years. I was next. The more I learned, the more I realized no one was immune. Not even the people closest to her. And as I stood there, watching Taylor perform once again, her body moving with unnatural precision, her eyes void of emotion, I realized the truth. This wasn't her anymore. She had become a puppet, a tool to feed the darkness that controlled her. But worse than that, the darkness wanted more. It had already begun to feed on all of us, and there was no escaping it. The ritual wasn't just about her. It was about us all, slowly being consumed piece by piece. There was no turning back now. What I had seen, what I had uncovered, was far more horrifying than I could have ever imagined. And the worst part was, I was trapped. There was no way out, no escape from the dark web I had found myself in. Taylor wasn't the only one paying the price for fame. We all were. We just didn't know it, until it was too late. As Taylor stepped onto that stage, the lights blinding her, the crowd cheering, I felt it. The cold hand of darkness creeping closer, wrapping around me. And I knew in that moment, we were all part of the ritual now. And there was no going back. No matter how much I tried to forget, no matter how much I tried to walk away, it would always be with me. And the truth I had uncovered would haunt me for the rest of my life. Taylor Swift wasn't just the world's biggest pop star. She was the vessel for something darker. And now, the rest of us were trapped in her wake, lost to the same forces that had claimed her. There was no escaping the ritual. Not for her. Not for me. Not for any of us. And as the crowd roared, cheering for the illusion, I knew one thing for sure. The darkness would never let go. I thought I could escape, but the truth was inescapable. Taylor Swift wasn't just a star. She was a vessel, bound to an ancient dark force. Every performance, every Grammy was a sacrifice, and I had seen it all. The ritual was never just hers. It consumed everyone around her. The crew, the team, even me. We were all trapped, bound by the same darkness that controlled her. There was no escape. The price of fame wasn't just hers to pay, it was ours too. And now, we were all part of the ritual, forever lost to it.